From Brisbane, Australia, this is episode 98 of The Normal Blokes, a podcast dedicated to improving the competitive 40k experience. I'm Denise, and today we've got Liam.
Good evening.
And we're joined by Macari himself, Nic Wright. How you doing, mate?
Good, mate. Good, mate. My mum is Mork, my dad is Gork, and in the bed, I like to sleep.
Well, anyone who's been to the Normal Blokes GT that happened recently would have heard the sultry tones and the non-subtle tones of Nic Wright yelling "Wah." It was lovely. To the to the intro of what is it? The Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, I was going to play it, but I didn't know if we'd get pulled because we didn't get the rights. Yeah, copyright. Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you on, man. It's I'm a bit sad because me and Nick used to live in the same building, and now he's bought a house and he's fucked off somewhere. So yeah, I don't get to see him as much. I don't get to sit by the pool.
Civilized
I don't get to deploy the scramblers at the pool with you anymore.
Yeah, it's devastating.
But I mean, this episode we're going to talk obviously a bit about orcs. We're going to talk about the Speedwaagh that's doing the rounds. We're going to talk about what makes it tick, what it's good at, what it's not so good at. And more importantly, at the end, we're going to talk a bit about how other armies can manage this menace. But before we get into it, I just want to talk a little bit about some charity that we're doing for Movember. So as you can see, we're coming up to our 100th episode, and we wanted to do something to raise a bit of money and give back. So a number of us have signed up to do Movember, and there's different challenges associated with it. I'm silly enough to pick the challenge that has told me to run 60 kilometers in 30 days, and I'm currently 14 Ks in, and my legs hurt. But there are a whole heap of things that you guys can do. So if anyone wants to jump on Movember and do it and raise some money, they can. And if you want to jump onto the Normal Blokes team, you can. Just search the Normal Blokes on Movember. But one cool thing we're doing is for anyone who donates to the Movember charity of the four of us podcast hosts that make it, and we'll link it onto the page once it's a bit more public. For every $10 that you donate, you'll get a ticket and you'll go into the raffle to win a commission-painted repulsor by Hayden Waldock or a commission-painted knight by Nic Wright. And I've already got some pictures of the repulsor, and it's in Normal Blokes colours with some marble doors. I'll put it up on the page, but I'm excited, guys. It's going to be sick.
It's going to be pretty awesome. I mean, I think for the people who haven't seen either of these painters actually paint a model, you're missing out on a visual spectacle. I mean, they're going to be beautiful, and I'm really proud that we're sort of supporting a cause that's near and dear to a lot of our Wargamers' hearts as well.
Yeah, and anyone who wants to give to the cause or do Movember, go ahead. We want to try and raise as much money as we can. And look, we've got some things in the works for our 100th episode, and we'll see how it pans out. We'd like to give you a bit more info next time because we're only two episodes away. Jesus. Okay, we've got some planning to do.
Oh dear. Getting long in the tooth.
Yeah, getting a bit long in the tooth, mate. The average podcast goes for like 7 or 8 episodes or something. Maybe we're just too stupid to stop.
We're like 3 times longer than that. I'm pretty good at maths.
Well, anyway, we'll dive straight in to our main topic. I think we'll start with Liam. Can you tell us, for the listeners at home who haven't had the pleasure of playing against a Speedwaagh, what is a Speedwaagh and what does it do? Or is what's his name on Guardians of the Galaxy? The big blue dude. Drax?
Thanos? What?
No, Drax. Yeah.
Drax.
You know how they're like, where's Gamora? Who's Gamora? And then he's like, why is Gamora? Anyway, let's get back onto the topic.
So the question is, why is Speedwaagh? Why is Speedwaagh? So for people listening at home, here's the analogy. If you haven't played it yet, here's the visual for you. You are a dude standing butt naked on a mountain, and you have a spoon, and there is an avalanche of snow coming at you, and you have to stop it with your spoon. That is what it's like to play against the Speedwaagh if you're not prepared. And the reason why I say something so ridiculous is that this is an army that can shoot you across the table and actually do over 1,000 wounds of damage in a shooting phase. It actually can. And because each unit of buggies can do 108 wounds with their squids alone. So if you actually put this in perspective, it is mathematically the best shooting army in the game. It is a durable army. It is fast. And it's also one of those armies that, because it's got out of line of sight shooting, it can be really oppressive to play, even if you've got good terrain. Now, here at the Normal Blokes, one of the things we always talk about is improving the competitive 40K experience. And on that note, what I really wanted to talk about today with our veteran Warboss himself, Nick, I wanted to have a bit of a chat about what it's like to play the Speedwaagh, and also what it's like to play against it and how you can actually get ready for it. Because 40K has seen some really oppressive shooting armies over the years. We've seen the triple repulsor lists. We've seen the Levy Dread lists. We've seen the Eldar Air Force back last edition. These armies all have one thing in common, and it's that they change the meta in competitive play. People have to get ready to burst them, and the Speedwaagh is no exception. In fact, in my opinion, it's the most oppressive of all of them thus far. And that's not to, put up your hat and resign. This is the episode where we're going to talk about how to crack the Speedwaagh, and if you do play Orcs, how you can put some tools in it to perhaps make your army a little bit more diverse and protect yourself from people who are going to give you the bad touch. On that note, I kind of want to hand it over to Nick. And I wanted to hand over to Nick to give us a rundown about what a typical Speedwaagh list actually involves. It doesn't have to be the most or the least competitive, but just sort of for people who haven't yet played it or people who haven't really heard of it, tell us what a list actually involves.
I'm more than happy to start, but I'm just still trying to subdue my erection from such an incredible analogy. My God, Liam, where did that drama come from? This is next level. Wow. Dr. Drama.
I've actually been practicing naked in the mirror with a spoon for like a week.
Oh, that's a visual I didn't know I was signing up for. Well,
Jesus.
let's forge on. Cloud of smoke, -1 to hit. All right, let's talk about Speedwaagh. So there's a few things that we're looking at here. Essentially with Speedwaagh, easy way to think of it is the floor is lava. We played it as kids. We just didn't know it was getting us ready for the tabletop. And from a lot of the Speedwaghs out there at the moment, we're not rocking a lot of troops, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But you've got masses of buggies, and predominantly the buggies that we're seeing is scrapjets, Megatrack scrapjets, and the squig buggies, Rocket Trug squig buggies, right? There's smatterings out there of lists with, custom booster blasters. Some people run shock jump dragsters, but predominantly it's those two incredibly points efficient and very oppressive shooting lists, buggies that are out there. So the Rocket Trugs and the scrapjets, they're normally supported mainly by a Bob on bike, Warboss on bike. He's the warlord because he calls the Speedwaagh, and that grants obviously the extra AP and extra plus to shot with Dakka weapons. And then apart from that, it's filled out with a variety of war bikes, -1 to hit, incredibly cheap, or Storm Boys, Commandos. They're probably the only foot sloggers that we've got in a Speedwaagh. And at the moment, what's gaining a lot of attraction is the planes, because they are so brutally, and I probably don't really want to say this, but undercosted. They are so cheap for what they do. They really provide that really, really, really in your face, no matter what turn, no matter where you are kind of vibe. So that's the Speedwaagh as you see it. So some of the planes that you're looking at is the Dakka jets fully loaded up in a Speedwaagh. Each plane is throwing 42 strength 6, -2 single damage shots, hitting on 4s if it's freebooters, and you've got the inevitable proc. You've got the Wazbomb blaster jet. I'm not going to go through all of it.
That was involuntary. That was totally involuntary. Don't say that word.
I was expecting that. These things are, again, super cost effective. I'm not going to go through all their guns just yet, but my God, have they got an insane amount of guns. They've got a 5-up invulnerable save. They're just absolutely incredible. So there's a lot in the Speedwaagh that is quick, high AP, high damage, long range, and it can get around the board. It can peek around cover. So that's the Speedwaagh in a nutshell.
Yeah. So, look, really good breakdown, Nick. Now, you played a version of the Speedwaagh at the Normal Blokes GT. When you played your games, what kind of things did you find you were really good at doing? And you're obviously going to say, I'm sure you'll say shooting shit. But what things did the list struggle with?
I played every single game that I played was super fun at the GT. Shooting is obviously what it's designed to do. Its combat potential is pretty minimal. Like, you can cop a few mortal wounds on the charge with, ramming speed or with a scrapjet punching in. But outside of that, it's primarily designed to just tear armies apart with pure volumes of fire. I also found that in things like secondaries were actually quite solid. I scored quite high. I don't think I scored lower than 30 on most of the games with secondaries, because they're just so, with the minimal troops that I had in my lists, it was very easy for them to just do their thing while I'm just cramming buggies down people's throats and planes and things like that. It's quite nice. I think that, Denise, I remember a game I had with you with the Stomper at the end of last Codex. It was the final game we played. Yes. It was the Evil Sons, Visions in the Smoke, Stomper versus your Armiger and Tank Commander Horde. And that was the pure glee of that game, of just the amount of explosions, and it was just unbelievable. We were both just sitting there with shit-eating grins on. Like, it was so good. There was so much DACA, but that's every game with the Speedwaagh. Every single game is that. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, it's very good at that. What it's not good at is against really good opponents, really savvy opponents. I played Brian Lakeland in, I think, round 4. And he was just incredible at move blocking. It was a really dense table, and he had a ton of Venoms, 10 Venoms. And even though in one turn, I think I killed half of them without a line of sight shooting in planes and things like that, even still, he was able to move block the rest of my buggies and even planes to a large degree.
In terms of what you found at the GT with those players that could do that to you, and in terms of like the list you have and the list that you're seeing, other Orc players use, what kind of tools do you think you could add to that to stop that happening? Like, could you add speed bumps in front of your army? Would you think dropping some of the firepower and adding more combat is useful? What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think and we were just chatting about it just prior, and Liam's touched on it, and we'll touch on it further. Being able to deny primary, I think, in an army like this, which once it's up the board, it's really hard to shift. So being able to reach out, destroy their primary, really just automatically makes them they're already running against the wind, and it automatically makes them really, really, really have to try and do something drastic to shift the turn of the battle. So truck boys I didn't have any in my list. I only had a unit of Grots. That's the only troops I had in the entire list. So 2 units of truck boys, I think, would be what I would love to include. Pretty simple, pretty low tax as well, to be able to just reach out and tag stuff and just turn primary off for 2 turns.
Totally fair. So I guess when you've got an army that's like heaps and heaps of big based vehicles, do you think it's fair to say that against armies with a lot of OBSEC, you struggled sometimes to defend your objectives against units, like for example, against Drakari, like little units of racks or stuff like that coming to take your objectives? Was that kind of your experience?
Yeah, there was 2. That game against Brian was probably a really, really good example, because he had so many waves of troops they didn't even have to charge. They could just walk up and touch the objective.
Yeah.
And and so it's just like, what do you fucking do? The best I was able to do is, because of the squads of buggies and coherency, they actually cover a really large amount of room. So you actually can block off objectives quite well when there's not as much terrain. That was probably the first game I've had where I had that traffic jam kind of concept, because I just couldn't maneuver around the terrain enough.
Yes. Yeah.
And that really, really hindered me there too.
And that's really interesting, because like terrain obviously doesn't affect your shooting that much, but it affects your ability to get to the spot you want to with a lot of these big bases.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice, yeah.
Yeah, there was something else in one of those first games as well, the outer line of sight shooting. Another reason why the trucks will be so good to have in the army is that Storm Boys, especially with the freebooters, start of your command phase, 1 CP, turn on OBSEC. I had some beautiful moments with that turned the tide of battle. And it was so good. But I've noticed a couple of people who had some good out of line of sight shooting, and they did the right thing and carved out all my infantry in a turn or 2. And it meant that was the game or 2 where the secondaries were really hard to achieve. Things like Rod, when you've got no infantry, it's pretty hard to do. Unless, Liam, you're about to tell me that aircraft can do rod as well. No, please tell me make the Lasbomb better, please.
That's funny. Yeah.
Glad to know then. Disappointing. So with that, those are also some of the weaknesses. If it's a low infantry list and they've got secondaries that are susceptible to it, you're probably going to die. But if you kill their point scoring units, then bon appetit.
Yeah. So, Nick, I guess one of the things that's really important to touch on, as someone who's played this list a bunch, like yourself, is there anything in your games that you can identify as the break point for the Speedwaagh? And so most sort of really oppressive shooting armies, their break point is pretty simple, like you lose a key unit or something in particular dies, or there's a particular piece of terrain in a certain way and then you just kind of direct. Terrain's not a problem for the Speedwaagh, and there's so much redundancy because there's just unit after unit of pretty much the same models. So in your games, the games that you lost, for example, did you have any moments where you felt, oh, yep, I've now lost the game? And can you kind of articulate, I guess, what those moments were? Like, what exactly happened?
You know what? And this is, I have no shame in saying it because it was purely my fault. But the two games that I lost, I timed out in both of them. One was a little bit later than the first because I was trying to hustle. But honestly, one of the break points of this army, if you aren't someone who rolls a lot of dice all the time, if you're a casual player and you're like, you know what, I want to put 20 buggies on the field, it's just the pure volume of fucking dice that you have to throw. Like, literally, you have to be thinking so far ahead. I know it seems silly, but I think unless you're a very quick player, this is a slow army to shoot because you've got so many decisions. Your shooting phase can take up the predominant amount of time, plus the fact we've just talked about how difficult dense terrain can make traffic jams. You've got a lot of order of operations to consider in this army. So I actually think the break point for me was really considering how I actually don't shoot with some units to make sure that I get time in 4th and 5th to clear out others. Does that make sense?
That's such a good point. And it's definitely something that for us in Brisbane, we've kind of stopped doing in 9th. I'm actually not sure why, but in 8th edition, we used to always play on a chess clock, right? Because time was a big issue. And for some reason now we haven't started playing on it, where we play at least. But I think it's time to go back to it, right? Because we've got these armies that have, in a turn, so many like actions or activations in a turn. Like, look at a Custodes army or even a Guard army, and they have so much less in terms of like activations than an AdMech or a Orc army, right? Like a Speedwaagh army. So I think maybe it's time to get the clock back.
I agree, and I think it's time that's a problem. It's like you can play pretty much any 2,000 point army in whatever time limit you can play. But it's also about the decision-making time, like your opportunity cost by playing the army. If you play, I don't know, like some madman might, 29 Custody, Guard, and like a single Inquisitor, you can spend 10 minutes every turn stopping, going for a poo, getting a beer, coming back, deciding what you're going to do. It's amazing. You can do whatever you want. You can take all the time in the world because you have so few models to move and you can make the right decisions all the time. But if you're playing a Speedwaagh, being realistic, you have less than a 300 point unit that shoots in excess of 60 shots and then missiles and then moves and then hits in combat and then reactive stratagems. The Speedwaagh does take enough time to play. So because of that, you have to accept that you might not actually get all the time in the world to think about your strategy. And so this kind of actually solid segue there, Denise, kind of leads me on to what I wanted to ask Nick next. Sorry to put you on the spot again, Nick. I hope you don't mind. Was there anything other than time that, like, for example, your opponents did that you went like, oh, damn? And the reason I say that is that there were certain lists way back when, really, really oppressive shooting and one that comes to mind was back in its sort of heyday, Guard and Castellan Knight combo, where just a few lucky rolls, for example, if the Castellan went down, those Guard armies lost more than the points cost of the Knight. They really lost a lot of they lost such a big component of the list's competitive level in that one model. And Speedwaagh doesn't have that because of the redundancy. But there has to be some things in your games that you see and you go, oh no. And I ask you this so that people can actually try and, cause those interactions more in a competitive setting if they don't really know what it is. Examples like, if people multi-tag your units with a durable unit you can't shift and stuff like that. What do you think some examples are?
Yeah, I've touched on one or two already, and I'll just make them relevant here. So there's two types of Speedwaghs that you're really seeing at the moment, and that's just due to the fact that most of the clans don't add something to them. So obviously people aren't going to choose it. You've got freebooters who make the shooting even better. So that's obviously going to be huge. And freebooters also have some great OBSEC stratagems for any infantry, things like that. And then there's also Blood Axe, which allows you to, and this is important to mention because it is relevant, but Blood Axe units are allowed to fall back and shoot or charge. And if they're an aircraft, they can do fallback for free anyway. But they're the two kind of clans that you'll see most commonly. The things for me that I found difficult is, once again, when my infantry died early, that did a few things. It completely stopped. I ran 2 Stormboys commando and the little Gretchen unit. The Goths did nothing. They just existed on a backfield objective. They were fine. But the 3 others are great utility for actions and primary denying because of that 1 CP start of command phase strat. So if you're facing a Speedwaagh and they've got minimal infantry, like I said, and they've got a secondary that uses infantry, just kill that infantry because you can shave 10 points off their final score, and that's a huge swing. So that's probably the first one. The second one is tagging. I played a great game against one of the Dorchester gents in the last game, and he did a fantastic job of using interceptors to just shunt forward, and he was just wave tagging my buggies because their range is so huge. And he was just able to tag buggies. And so there was pretty much 2 units of buggies at all times in that game that were not able to shoot as a result of that.
Yeah.
So they're 2 things.
Sorry, Nick. I was just going to say, even though the buggies, they can shoot into the combat and whatever, even if you're tagging them, you're just dictating where those guns are going and you can keep other stuff safe. And that's a really good point. If the orc players are gearing into freebooters to just take the shooting up to 11 or 12, they're foregoing the Blood Axe option of fallback and charge, and they're foregoing the redeploy and stuff like that. So brings you to a similar point. Like Liam, we played at a tournament recently where you actually won with the Thousand Suns. Are you on 3 tournament wins in a row now? You are, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Lovely. And you actually played against an 18 buggy list at one of these tournaments, and you won.
I did, yeah.
And you're able to do this kind of thing. Did you want to talk about how you did that?
Yeah, so the buggy list that I played was, I would argue, probably the most extreme example of what the buggy list can be. And I say extreme in that it really went full redundancy, but it didn't have much versatility as a result. So the shooting of this army is probably second to none, with the exception of maybe some WAS bombs. So I played a list that was 18 buggies, 9. I played against this list. So 9 of the Rucka Twucka squeak buggies, and then 9 of the Mechatrack scrapjets. God, say that 3 times. And this list was all freebooters to proc the +1 to hit. Now, I'm playing Thousand Suns, which are a very durable army. The problem is that I absolutely can't kill the Speedwaagh. So my approach to this game, we played Vital Intelligence, which I admit is a mission that favors me, for sure. My attitude here was make one of my units super unappealing to shoot. And when you look at a normal 40k table, I think one of the key ways to fight the scrapjets is to actually pull them into a spot, like Nick mentioned, where they're in a bad spot of terrain. So this table, if you can kind of imagine it, with Vital, it has the diagonal line of objectives down the center of the table, with the objectives on the right-hand side, from your perspective, being closer to you. So what I did is I put my Terminators, my big unit of Terminators, on the left-hand side of the table, which meant that for my opponent to hold objectives, he had to come towards the objectives on the right-hand side of the table, which is closer to me. The reason this is important is that I have units like Chaos Spawn and Rhinos and stuff that can just go up, tag, and surround to wrap the buggies. So I had to take the bug. I put everything out of line of sight. I had to take the buggies for a turn of shooting, which I'm durable enough to do. And then I was in combat with pretty much all of my army after that. Being so aggressive early on is kind of mandatory. I'm not sure if you agree, Nick, but being aggressive with the buggies is like the players who are playing the buggies, you sort of have to be aggressive, right? Because otherwise, if you don't get that primary early on, even if you table someone turn 4, you might actually just lose out on points. And that's what I think is really rewarding about the 9th edition mission pack, in my opinion, that you actually can't sit in your deployment zone. You will straight up lose games if you just stay in your deployment zone. And that's the crutch that you have to strike at if you're going to play against the Speedwaagh. You have to make them make huge sacrifices just to hold the primary. I think that's the best way I can word it. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, once again, just reflecting on the games that I was playing, if the word you used there, which really stuck with me, was durability. And I think the way that this list will start to shift meta, obviously we might see more anti-tank, we might see a variety of things, but we'll also see that uptick again of durability, like with the squig buggies being able to, if there's any important infantry sitting behind a ruin, it's pretty much gone. Like if you've got 5 of them, that can delete most, mech kind of infantry and cover pretty piss in a turn. So you've got to have those layers of durability, like rhinos, that redundancy to be able to do that and use the other natural durable units. Maybe it's built-in minuses to hit, maybe it's -1 damage, whatever it may be, maybe both. Feel no pains, those kind of things. Use them as the anvil to push up and really, consider how you're leveraging those. Does that make sense? Like I think that's how I'm thinking it's really going to shift it.
Yeah, because I think what you mentioned there is also really important, Nick, because like for example, a unit of infiltrators, which are, I wouldn't say squishy, but aren't durable either, are naught but tissue paper against squig buggies. The strength 5, AP 2 or 3, damage 2 is an almost perfect profile to be shooting out of line of sight into Space Marines. So then you kind of start asking yourself some weirder questions, like are things like transports and stuff might make a bit of a resurgence? Because previously, I don't know, I know they can't go in a rhino, but something like a rhino was previously never worth its points cost, because there's no way you wouldn't rather just having, let's say, 5 to 10 more Marines. But if that rhino takes twice the number of squig buggies to shoot it out of line of sight to kill, as would the units that have gone inside it, maybe the maths has swung. Maybe the things you need to put in your army are different now, but accomplish the same things in terms of like units alive, turn 2, turn 3.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Like, Liam, one thing I'm looking at against the squig buggy lists, both the Rucker Trucks, the Scrapjets, maybe not the WASBomb as much, because the WASBomb's just like, it just throws mats out the window. It's amazing. But they're mainly kind of strength 5, neg 2 to neg 3, or strength 8, neg 2, neg 3, 2 or 3 damage. So things that kind of hurt them. Negs to hit still hurt them because they struggle to get that first kill.
Yes.
Neg 1 damage still hurts them. The damage 3 is a bit better, but definitely the damage 2, it hurts them. The other thing that hurts them is, even though they can get their AP to neg 2, neg 3, there's no way for them to remove cover. So you can still have situations where, 2-up save things like Custodes or Terminators or whatever can get to a 0-up save, and unless they've popped Speedwaagh turn 1, you're still on a 2-up. So, like, there are, like Liam, we were having a conversation about the Custode Shield Guard list with the Custode Dreadnoughts, and that's like a weirdly tough list for the Speedwaagh to actually crack. And it's a list that will punch the shit out of the Speedwaagh if it gets anywhere near it, right? So, like, there's some arguments for, like, I'm looking at it from the Imperium side. Do we go back to like just Storm Shields on Terminators chilling out, and Custodes with the Magnifica chilling out, to just cop the Speedwaagh and then have another part of the army that can run in and tag it, or run in and do damage to it, or move up and shoot it. And that's really interesting, because when Drakari and Admech were around, the whole deal was let's find ways to trade as quickly and simply and as cheaply as we can into these armies that are better at trading than us. So it's such a weird, diverse situation. We're going to have to account for Admech and Druk to trade well, and then we're going to have to account for being durable against Speedwaagh.
Denise, you mentioned something really interesting there about how, like, you know, the units we pick into I mentioned transports, but what you're talking about there is like specific units that are more durable. A thought also comes to mind. Back at the start of this edition, there was like a series of stratagems or unit abilities, things to make units untargetable. That was a really big thing back when. We're talking about salamanders, noble self-sacrifice, untargetable dreadnoughts because of bodyguards, stuff like that, that I think definitely faded away over time. Or rather, perhaps this is an Australian sort of phenomenon, but we play quite melee intensive armies here by and large, and so a lot of these you can't shoot me in the shooting phase abilities faded away. I wonder if some of those abilities might also have more value than they ever have done before against the Speedwaagh. Marines still remain one of the most commonly played factions in the game. I think they always will be, and something like noble self-sacrifice actually does work out of line of sight. It does, to my understanding, it still doesn't have the stipulation for closest visible. It's just the closest unit.
Yeah.
So you can actually make some truly good plays as a Marine player by abusing this stratagem. I think the WAS bombs pose kind of like a life-ending threat to that sort of idea, but it definitely makes you wonder if we can manage the WAS bombs. The rest of the army is shooting you from one direction. Maybe there is a way to play around it. And Denise, you've actually been playing around kind of recently with some ideas to stress out Orc Flyers, like specifically. And obviously they're specifically Space Marines, but this is sort of an example of stuff that all factions could do. Like, what are you playing with, Denise?
Yeah, so like a number of the lists that are being played that are really fucking oppressive are the freebooters ones, right? Because you make full advantage of your scrap jets and your WAS bombs by getting the +1s to hit. And the freebooters, from what I'm aware of, don't have a redeploy ability, right? Like it's just the blood axes, hey? Yeah. So I'm looking at running just something stupid, like the Dreadnought list that I have for Deathwatch, but just take one unit of infantry out and just put 2 Space Marine Hunters in. Like, it sounds ridiculous. Like, no one's ever heard of a hunter, right? It shoots one shot. It's strength 9, neg 3, d6 damage. It's a one-shot las cannon, but it gets +2 to hit against the aircraft, sorry. So you're hitting on 2s against neg 1. And against aircraft, the damage goes to d6 +6.
D6 +6.
And this motherfucker, this hunter is T8, 11 wounds, 3 up armor, but it's only 110 points. So it's like I'm paying 110 points, 10 points a wound for T8. It's actually like a bit of a damage sponge, because I'm thinking if I have 1 or 2 of these guys, the rest of the army is almost the same. But then the Orc player, for some weird reason, has to kill this thing, because if he doesn't kill this thing, it's going to just blow up a plane. And if he's killing this 110 point piece of shit, he's not killing a dreadnought, right? And this 110 point piece of shit can pop smoke, can be obscured.
Ooh,
so
spicy.
Like, I'm just thinking if like something like that to just sneak into a list saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm a big distraction, but I can kill a plane." if that's going to make the Orc player think twice about deploying or reserving the jets, which means, there's 2 turns free where you're not getting a WAS bomb, so you can actually use the rest of your army to run up and tag, the buggies like we've talked about. I'm experimenting with it. I'm not sure if it'll work, but these are kind of the discussions I'm looking at going, I was a bit mopey about the Speedwaagh at the start, especially this last Saturday, Liam, when we were at the TNA tournament. I was like, oh my God, I saw Sam Rubino lose more than 1,000 points in one turn. And I was like, wow. But now I was like, what? And then I was thinking, wait, like we've just got to move on. It's like the triple repulsor. We've just got to move on. Yeah. Find something that will hopefully stress the Orc player out. And it was really interesting to hear what Nick was saying, having been in those shoes and having, played the Speedwaagh and still feeling like, hey, there's some stuff that still challenges this list. It's not like unbeatable, right? And if I can segue for a bit, like I used to find Tau in 8th edition really hard to play against until one game I just set up a Tau list and just played against my friend Wayne. Hey, Wayne's in episode number 98. Fuck yeah. So I just played against Wayne because he wanted to practice against Tau. And I looked at it and I go, wow, this list falls apart this way, you can get charged through a wall. This thing's, if I move too far away, I get tagged. If I lose all my drones from out of line of sight, this dies. And just the experience of going into the shoes of that army helped me play against it. So I think it's really nice to have you on, Nick, to go through what it feels like on the other side. So players who are playing into the Speedwaagh know a bit of what to focus. Sorry, Nick, we've made your game harder.
That's right, man. I'm just battling the clock. If I can just master the clock,
You're just still playing yourself, aren't you?
Better than playing with myself, Mum always said. Hey, one thing I found really interesting. I was chatting to a mate of mine, Cross, who enjoys more casual play. I know this is about competitive, improving the competitive scene, but the thing that actually was interesting for me is I hadn't thought about, because I'm very defensive probably around the buggies. I don't think the orc list is that oppressive. I think it is oppressive, but I think you can combat it with the right tools, right? But when he was talking about his experience playing another local punter, and he just hated the Speedwaagh, I realized that it actually is for casual play. I think it's completely broken.
Oh yeah,
I think it's so unfair. Like, how would you know any of these kind of things? So it was actually really refreshing for me. It's the first time I heard an argument that I was like, oh, true. If you just play this with if you're beer hammer, this list is actually not fun. Like, after chatting with him, I don't think I would take a Speedwaagh against a friend who was just having like a good time. It's just such an oppressive list in that way.
Yeah, that's it. And it all kind of relates to the ability of the person playing against it to handle it. Like you fucking don't run headfirst into a tank. You like roll a grenade under it. So like, you don't take this thing head on if you can't, or if your army can't, because it'll just fall apart, right? Yeah. So I don't know. It's definitely relative. I'm trying to make a really shit metaphor here.
Yeah, it was really good. I was really there for it,
mate. Yeah. Let's get the shield out. But yeah, like if your ability to fight it is like the knowledge base isn't there, or if your army can't do it, it's so hard. And like imagine like not understanding how it works and just coming into a casual game that you play and just get stomped by it. It's pretty shit.
Yeah, rubbish.
Yeah.
And I think, Denise, sorry to sort of segue off again, but yours and Nick's point there is something we actually touched on ages ago in one of the very early episodes of this podcast. And it's kind of about the intent of the game. Like, I think that the Speedwaagh is super oppressive and it does promote bad feelsies. But if you are going to a big singles competitive tournament, I think that you should first of all expect to see some Speedwaghs, and also if you are taking a Speedwaagh, that's totally okay. Like in the context of a competitive singles event where anything goes, like an ITC event, it's totally okay. But also kind of setting those boundaries is the wrong word, but sort of setting the expectations on events is one of the hardest jobs as a TO. And if you're running a local, let's say like an RTT with just people in your hometown to play some games, and you've got, Jimothy with his Alatok army, and then Kyle with his Tau broadsides, and then you've got, Nic Wright with his Speedwaagh, sorry, bro. And then you can sort of see how the intent or what people wanted from this event might differ greatly. And so I think that's going to be one of the really important things with an army like Speedwaagh, because who's to say what the next couple of codexes are going to be? Who's to say what the game is going to be in a year's time from today? And I think that Speedwaagh more than ever is kind of making people go, oh, okay, I have to make sure that I, first of all, have the right tools if I'm competitive, but also that I communicate clearly with my opponent. Like, very few people are going to, on a Friday night over beer and pretzels, go crack open those Rucker Truckers big buggies and throw them down my throat. I'm looking forward to packing up my army in deployment. Let's do it. Like, nobody. And again, to reinforce, this is not me saying you should feel bad for playing squig buggies. It's an awesome competitive list. It is actually cool to look at. Some of them are painted beautifully. Yeah, here in Brisbane, Nick, we have yourself, we have Alex Terrison, we have some people who've painted some beautiful armies, and in no way am I saying they should go away, but also they belong at competitive events. They do not belong in garage houses.
Geez. Well, yeah, look, I mean, we've definitely talked a bit about this list, and I think for those listening at home, if you are struggling against this kind of thing, or if you're hearing stuff about this list being strong, that the best thing you can actually do is hit up a mate that plays this, or like get a friend to proxy it, or hop on TTS or whatever, and play against it and feel it out for yourself. Because I had the same situation. I played against our good friend Paul Gurney on TTS, and I went first, and I was able to tag a lot of the buggies, and I thought, wow, this actually isn't as bad when I'm just tagging it up and it can't shoot. And more importantly, it can't move through you when it gets tagged, right? So like you just lock it in. So there are still ways to handle it. But I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done beforehand, going into that matchup. But
Absolutely.
yeah, look, I think, is there anything else you guys want to cover before we finish up?
Liam, I think it is. I was going to say, I think it's really worth mentioning some of that chat you were throwing. You and I a little bit were talking about with the recent London GT. Was it the GT?
Yeah,
What it's called? Whatever. Yeah, because that was really curious. Just how you approached. Like my question for Liam was, let's role play. Was like, hey, why was there no orcs in the top? Why was there no orcs that placed well? Like really, like they got shafted. And if that's what you're into, great. But if not, then that's a bad time. And Liam, take it away, because I thought it was a really articulate reasoning.
Hey, Nick, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on to the show. Hey, my answer to your question. So the London GT had a couple of facets about it that I think meant that the Orc Speedwaagh didn't take that event home. And I think those same problems are going to occur in quite a few events. The way I sort of see those problems is they kind of fall into like two key categories. The first being terrain, and the second just being the nature of a dice game. So if you theoretically, let's say you play an 8-round event, you should go second in half of those games. You should. So if you go second, like Denise, you just said before, you played a Speedwaagh with your Death Watch, and when you went first in that game, you found the game was drastically different. That's the same for a lot of armies, man. Like a lot of armies play against the Speedwaagh and they go, hey, look, I got first turn. Even if I can't kill them, I trap them in their deployment zone, and I might get tabled turn 4 or even turn 3, but I'm up like 30 points on the primary. They actually can't outscore me at this point. And at the London GT, this was coupled with the issue with the terrain. Now, some of the tables at the London GT, and I'm being sort of frank here, had quite light terrain, and the terrain they did have was not particularly functional on some of the tables. And because of that, what that meant was that if you were also playing a gun line, let's say a Speedwaagh versus Speedwaagh, whoever speeds the Speedwaagh first wins that game. And so if you went second, you would get shot off the table. But there are other shooting armies in the game too. Like there are plenty of shooting armies out there that can actually kill a lot of those buggies if they go first. And so I was actually paying attention on the pairings of the London GT. And I actually saw some Speedwaghs go down against some Marine armies, some Death Guard armies. I saw them go down against a few armies that you could see they lost the game because they went second. And the terrain meant they couldn't hide. And so they actually lost a lot of their army. So I think that to answer Nick's question, the reason why in an 8-round event, I think the Speedwaagh might encounter problems is that probabilities dictate you're going to cop a hard game, and you're probably going to go second in that game at least once, especially if, as a Speedwaagh, you're going to be winning a lot of your games. You're going to be playing some really top tier opponents, especially at big singles events. And if you're going to be playing those opponents, expect jank, like expect people who know what to do. And you might find, whoa, I haven't seen someone do that before. I'm actually just going to lose this game.
And I guess as much as Speedwaagh like hits you hard and kills you, it's not there to play the primary game. Like it's not there to score primary. It's there to blow you up and take the board and apply so much pressure at a certain turn in the game.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's
I
really
guess
good
just
point.
Sorry, you go, Nick.
No. I was going to say, and as you're saying it, it's literally my experience. Like I actually prefer a second turn start. I love going second. But when you go first as a Speedwaugh, I think nearly every game that I went first, it was like mass destruction. You're just dropping it's a Moab on the battlefield, and you are killing anything the light touches. Mufasa, it's fucking dead. It's just unbelievable. Actually, sorry, with squid buggies, anything the light doesn't touch as well, actually. So the whole battlefield. So the first turn is really impactful with this type of army, even though traditionally I really don't like first turn. I find it very stressful. I love reacting. So yes, I completely concur.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if you are a player going to a singles event, one of the things I mentioned before is that the Speedwaugh lists are going to do well based on what Nick just mentioned, the pure tactical nuke destruction they can unleash in a single first turn. So if you're going to an 8-round singles event, for example, for many of the Brisbane guys and Australia, Uprising Adelaide is the next big singles event. If you're going to Uprising, for example, which I'll have 160 people, Denise, how many people, sorry?
I believe they're going for 140.
Okay, 140. So let's say that there's 140. I think it's pretty reasonable to consider there might be at least 10 orc lists. Mm-hmm. And I think the vast majority of those are probably going to be Speedwahs. Now, those lists are going to win, I think, most of their games. They should have a positive win-loss record. And that means that if you're going to try and do well at that event, expect to play 1, 2, 3, heck, 4 Speedwahs. If you're Brian Lakeland, you might just play 8 rounds straight of Speedwahs. Brian. You might just play Speedwaugh after Speedwaugh. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's going to be a gatekeeper. 1 or 2 of those lists might do super extremely well. But if you're trying to break into that podium sort of bracket, you've got to be able to ruck the squawks.
The best was Brian at CanCon 2019. Round 2 to round 7 or round 2 to round 8 was just iron hands after iron hands. That was the best.
Yeah, man. I actually had a pretty similar experience where I played round 1 Chaos Knights, and then round 7 through to 8 I played Space Marines, only broken up by Ben Warrior playing White Scars. So I played 6 Iron Hands players, and then Ben being like, my list is different. Sorry, Ben. And playing White Scars. And it's just like I played 7 Marine players in a row. It's just oh my God.
That's rough.
The orcs can't take it anymore.
Oh, jeez. Oh, well, hey, anything else to add, guys?
No, I think we've speeded this to death.
Sick dudes. Well, big thank you to Nick for coming on. That was actually super insightful seeing it from your end after your experience playing it at the GT. To anyone who's listening, if you have any questions about playing against the Speedwaugh with your faction, we've got the second best Warboss on the podcast, Liam Hackett, who has a bit of orc knowledge that is happy to answer your questions. He's happy to answer your questions if you shoot them through to the podcast Facebook page. So let us know, and Liam will be able to help you out. He's monitoring it 24/7. He sleeps 1 hour like a vampire. And I'll get to it and pick on Liam a little bit on the messages because I don't really know that much. But hey, if you liked our show, please give us a like on Facebook, subscribe to us on iTunes, and if you want to support the podcast, we do have a Patreon that helps cover our costs on www.patreon.com/allblokes, and we'll be putting out some posts in the next couple of weeks regarding our Movember campaign, so please look out for that. And if you donate, you'll have a chance to win those 2 awesome panda models that we'll put some pictures up for as well. But stay safe, everyone. See you next time.
See ya.